Golden State Media Concepts bring you Book Review Podcast, a haven for bookworms of all ages and the widest genres, from mystery to memoirs, romance to comedy, fantasy to sci-fi. If you love to read, this is a podcast for you. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast.
To the GSMC Book Review Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Sarah. It is Tuesday. We have another interview, and I'm very excited about this interview. I'm excited about all the interviews, as I'm sure you've noticed, but we have a returning author today, and this is Matty's third trip to the podcast. She is the second person to have been on the podcast 3 times. If you are interested in hearing her other episodes, they are episodes 41 and 92, so definitely go check those out if you haven't listened to them before, especially episode, I think it's 41, where we talk about the other books in this series, the Anne Kinnear suspense series. We are talking about the third book in that series today. It is called The Falcon and the Owl. And I'm just very excited to have Matty back. I always enjoy talking to her. I always enjoy finding out what's going on with her, what's going on with her characters, what I can find out about how she's tormenting her main characters nowadays, etc. As I said, this third book in the Anne Kinnear suspense series is called The Falcon and the Owl. The description on the back is as follows. A small plane crashes in the Pennsylvania wilds, and only Anne Kinnear has the ability to discover the force that brought it down. Will the secret the victims carried die with them or come back to haunt her? Anne Kinnear is indulging her love of aviation by working toward her pilot's license at Avondale Airport and protecting her privacy by discouraging the attentions of a filmmaker intent on documenting her spirit-sensing abilities. Little does she know that a fiery plane crash in the Pennsylvania wilds will embroil her in a race to track down a contract on which 2 rivals are banking their futures. And when airshow pilot Gwen Burridge launches a smear campaign against Anne, she is even more determined to uncover the truth. Anne travels to the crash site and learns what brought the plane down, but it's only part of the story. Will Anne land safely or be the latest victim of a secret someone is willing to kill to keep? So that is the description of The Falcon and the Owl by Matty Dalrymple. And it is yet another fun mystery, kind of mystery. I mean, it's fun because Anne can sense spirits, and she's actually getting stronger in her ability, so she can even now speak directly with them and often see them in full form, as opposed to just kind of sensing that they're there, seeing them not so clearly, etc. So she gets information that other people, of course, are not going to have, but she still has to put the pieces together and figure out who's not telling her what, because even the ghosts that she speaks with, the spirits that she speaks with, still tend to, have their secrets, and they don't always tell her the whole story. So she's trying to figure everything out. She does have more of an inside scoop, though, than some of the other people involved, of course, because she can speak with people who are no longer living. She is taking flying lessons, as it says, so that is fun. I got to learn a little bit about aviation in this book. There's a lot of aviation in this book because one of the other a lot of the characters are pilots, or they work at the airport that Anne is taking flying lessons at. And so we're getting to know Anne a little bit more as the series progresses. That's one of my favorite things about series, is learning more about the main character, the secondary characters, as those books go on, because of course the main focus is usually the story or the mystery, but then you get more of a picture, more of the story filled in for all of the characters. I also enjoy Anne's brother and brother-in-law in this book. I just think they're a very cute couple, and they always make me smile. And so I enjoy getting to know a little bit more about them as the story goes on. And I feel like Anne is growing as a person. I don't mean that to sound like it does, like condescending or anything, but she's not had an easy life because of her spirit sensing abilities, and she's been a little bit of an isolationist because of that. Can't blame her, but it's nice to see her, even as a fictional character, coming out of her shell a bit more and getting out into the world and interacting with more people and embracing this gift that she has, as opposed to trying to hide it or ignore it, etc. So she had some adventures in this one, not quite as life-threatening as they were in the last one, when she definitely had some craziness. No, I'll take that back. I can't say that they weren't quite as life-threatening. This poor woman, as with all main characters in books like this, Matty's always just throwing her into situations that she's got to get herself out of and try not to be too injured in the process. So let's go ahead and turn now to the interview with Matty. Again, the book is called The Falcon and the Owl. It is the third novel in the Anne Kinnear suspense series.
Hi, Matty. Welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you for having me back. This is so fun.
I am happy to have you back. I love chatting with you, and we are here to talk about your one of the newer books in your Anne Kinnear suspense series. Before we get to the book, though, if you could start with sharing a little bit about yourself for people who maybe haven't heard the other interviews or maybe need a refresher.
Sure. So I'm Matty Dalrymple, and I'm the author of the Anne Kinnear suspense novels and suspense shorts and the Lizzie Ballard thrillers. And I also have a nonfiction platform called The Indie Author, where I podcast, speak, and consult on writing and publishing, as I like to say, the writing craft and the publishing voyage, because I love using nautical metaphors for those activities in my writing and speaking. And I also have a podcast called The Indie Author Podcast. So I'm trying to cover all the aspects of writing and publishing with those two platforms.
Yeah. Why do you like the connection between writing and nautical themes?
I've just never found any aspect of writing and publishing that doesn't have a great and instructional metaphor or analogy in the nautical world. I was just talking with someone about the idea of being a relaxed author. It was a topic that Joanna Penn on her podcast, The Creative Penn, was talking about with her guest, Mark Leslie LaFave. And they were talking about how, you can sometimes gain more benefit by being a relaxed author, not sort of banging away at a goal or switching, without direction from goal to goal. And I was speaking with a friend of mine who's a sailor, and I said, is there a good sailing analogy for that? And he said, absolutely. There's the concept of you're tacking into the wind, but you get to a point where you start having diminishing returns, and one tendency is just to tack in the other direction, hoping you can pick up a better wind angle. But oftentimes when you do that, you're just tacking into another problem, and that oftentimes it's better to sort of stick on the tack you're on and work through it, and you'll end up getting to your destination more quickly. And, so I just love that analogy in that circumstance, and there's always a good one regardless of what the topic is.
That's really cool. I don't know a lot about sailing or anything water related, so I wouldn't even know where to start. So I like that. It's not nautical in nature, but instead we have aviation in this new book. One of the new Anne Kinnear suspense novels is called The Falcon and the Owl. Before we talk about that specifically, since it is the third book in the series, can you just give an overview of the Anne Kinnear series as a whole?
Sure. So the series starts out with the sense of death, and Anne is a woman who can sense spirits, and she, with her brother as her business manager, has set up a sort of consulting business where she'll go into people's homes or places of work, and she can tell them whether or not there is a spirit inhabiting that spot. And when the story starts, she has very, very basic skills. She can kind of get a sense of colors related to a spirit, or sense in a sense of odors related to a spirit, and whether it's a malignant or a benign spirit. But then through the course of the first book, her skills increase, and as that is happening, she is drawn into a murder investigation in Philadelphia, which is near my home base here in Chester County, Pennsylvania, by detectives in the Philadelphia Police Department, and is able to make some contributions to the investigation through her ability, and in the process gets herself into some dicey situations. And then it continues in the second book, which is The Sense of Reckoning, and that takes place in one of my favorite places in the world, which is Mount Desert Island, Maine, where Bar Harbor and Acadia National Park are. And Anne goes up to Maine to help out a friend with a sort of similar business engagement. He is also a censor. His name is Derek Mazur, and Anne just thinks she's kind of helping a friend out with a task, and yet she gets enmeshed in this historically based mystery that involves a fire that took place in 1947. That was a true fire, not a fictional fire. There were huge fires in Maine in 1947 after a very dry summer, and one of them burned across Mount Desert Island, and in fact burned some of the big, as they call them, cottages on Millionaire's Row outside Bar Harbor. And so Anne gets enmeshed in that investigation. So those are the first two books that lead up to book 3, which is The Falcon and the Owl.
And I had, in the questions that I sent you, I had asked about the title switch. We've got the first 2 novels have the sense of in them. Did you change tacks on the title because Anne's skills are developing further and it's more than just a sense now?
That's really interesting. It's not that, but I can see how that would be an assumption. I've been trying to think back. So The Sense of Death came out in 2013, and I believe that the way I happened upon The Sense of Death is that I was looking for quotes related to ghosts or the afterlife or death, knowing that that's Anne's profession. And I happened upon a quote from Shakespeare, which was, "The sense of death is most in apprehension, and the poor beetle that we tread upon in corporal severance feels a pang as great as when a giant dies." And I not only love that quote, which was great for the story, that quote is from Measure for Measure, but I also just thought The Sense of Death was a great title. And, it's Shakespeare, so it always has that going for it. And I really like series that have a theme to the titles, and pulling them all from Shakespeare quotes is, I thought a good path to take. And so when I was looking for a title for the second book, I actually can't remember if I went looking for a phrase that started with the sense of, but one way or the other, I happened upon the speech from Henry V that is, "O God of battles, steel my soldiers' hearts, possess them not with fear, or take from them now the sense of reckoning. If the opposed numbers, pluck their hearts from them." And again, it was a quote that was really good for the book, and I love The Sense of Reckoning as a title. I love the fact that there was a theme there with the sense of. But then I think that the only other quote from Shakespeare that has the phrase, "the sense of," is the sense of self, which really has nothing to do with anything. Which is just a novel title, and it sounds like a self-help book. So even when I found The Sense of Reckoning, I knew that was going to be the last of the sense of thread. And so I was going to have to go look a little further afield for a title for the third book.
That makes sense. I had noticed when I was looking with this book, the Shakespeare quote, and then I was looking on your website at the fourth book and noticed the Shakespeare quote and thought, okay. So I apparently had not noticed that in the first 2, but good to know.
Yeah, so, all the novels and all but one of the short stories have Shakespeare quotes as the epigraph, and then the title is taken from the epigraph. And the one short story that does not have a Shakespeare title is All Deaths Endure. And I had found that I spend a lot of time just searching Shakespeare quotes that include the word death. And so I had happened upon that, but as I did more research, I realized that that was actually not Shakespeare, even though a web page had told me it was. This is why you should always take anything on the web with a grain of salt. It's John Milton from Paradise Lost. But that quote was, "So dear I love him, that with him all deaths I could endure, without him live no life." And again, just perfect for the story I wanted to tell. And I thought, okay, well, I'm going to be willing to make an exception for John Milton for that one. But yeah, all the other ones are Shakespeare quotes.
I always have to laugh when I think about authors' internet search histories anyway, but I just love that, you're searching Shakespeare quotes for the word death.
Yeah, that's probably one of the more innocuous ones. You do hear some pretty horrifying searches that people end up doing, especially if they're writing crime fiction.
Exactly, yeah. So let's talk a little bit then about The Falcon and the Owl. It's, as I said, the third book in the series. What is Anne up to this time?
So Anne is back in Pennsylvania, in the Philadelphia area. This time she is involved at a small airport, and it's actually an actual airport that is near me. It's called New Garden Flying Field, but in the book it's Avondale Airport. And Anne is happily at Avondale Airport taking flying lessons, working toward her pilot's license, which I had been doing myself a number of years ago, not at New Garden, but at another airport in the Chester County area. And then simultaneously, there are some nefarious activities that go on at the airport, and gets pulled in, and in the process is asked to go up to Clinton County in north central Pennsylvania to try to communicate with two people who have died in a plane crash. The plane has left from Avondale Airport, was flying up to one of the pilot's cabin up in northern Pennsylvania, and crashed in Clinton County. And someone hires Anne to go talk to them to try to track down a document that only one of the people in the plane knows the location of.
Yeah, poor Anne. I mean, I know this is actually her job, but she's just trying to learn to fly. She's just trying to do something normal for once.
Yeah, I just have some time off, she says.
Right.
Nice for Anne, but very boring for the reader.
Well, exactly. Anne just sat by the lake and read a book.
That's right.
I just completely lost my train of thought. This is why we are not live. So, what was your initial inspiration for this particular story?
So I actually was taking flying lessons back in 2013. So in 2013, the first book, The Sense of Death, came out. And then after that, I was working on The Sense of Reckoning, and also trying to market The Sense of Death, and working a full-time job and taking flying lessons. And in there somewhere, I don't even remember the chronology myself anymore, I actually was an airplane owner. I was the owner of I'm actually going to look it up so I make sure I get the year right. 1946 Stinson 108. It's a high-wing tailwheel plane that I had purchased because I wanted to learn to fly in it. And then if you ever have like several hours of other podcast time, ask me to tell that story, and I can regale your listeners for that. But suffice it to say that between a full-time job and writing and publishing and marketing work, the flying lessons just stopped being fun. They were, I would be coming up to a weekend where I was having a flying lesson, and then I was finding that it was more of a stressor to me than it was fun. And I was really only doing it for the fun of it. I didn't have any like professional goals related to piloting. But I loved aviation, and my husband's a pilot. And so, I'm able to go up in his plane. I got just kind of fascinated. You were mentioning before about writers' internet search histories, and I have just watched dozens and dozens and dozens of hours of plane crash investigation videos.
wow.
YouTube. Yeah, you get sucked into it. It gets fascinating. It's kind of horrifying, but fascinating too. But I had always just wanted to do a book that tapped into my own aviation experience and then the aviation experience of the people that I had met along the way. For example, when I had my plane, there was a friend of mine who was really helpful to me in trying to navigate plane ownership. And he's the one who came up with what would exist in an airplane mechanic's hangar that could be used as a murder weapon. So it's important to have subject matter experts for esoteric topics like that.
Yeah, that would be very specific research that you would look into. But important, because you don't want to just have some completely random object that is used as a murder weapon.
That's right. It's important to get those kinds of details right.
We're going to go ahead and take our first break of the podcast, but in terms of murder weapons and what would be available in various locations, I don't write murder mysteries. I don't write suspense or thrillers, so I don't generally spend a lot of time thinking about murder weapons, but I feel like I would just come up with like something completely ridiculous and random, silly putty, like the first thing that pops into my head. Obviously, I wouldn't write a murder using a silly putty, but I do like to just come up with completely random things to throw out into that, hey, what are you thinking would be an appropriate murder weapon? Play-Doh. Apparently I have squishy children's toys on the brain right now. But anyway, while you contemplate appropriate murder weapons, we're going to take our first break. When we come back, we'll be talking more about Anne and how she's evolving as a character. So stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I'll be right back.
Are you tired of the same old news? Are you sick of the seemingly endless political spin and negativity? The GSMC America's Still Beautiful podcast is a weekly news podcast covering all the top positive and uplifting news stories. We cover stories that will inspire, uplift, and remind you of the good in the world. Tune into the Golden State Media Concepts America's Still Beautiful podcast to get all the great and positive news stories of today. Download the GSMC America's Still Beautiful podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast and my interview with Matty Dalrymple. If you came up with a really great example of a completely random and or ridiculous murder weapon, hit me up on social media. I would love to hear your thoughts. The crazier, the sillier, the weirder, the better. Please tell me. I need that silliness in my life right now. So let's go ahead and return to the interview with Anne. Again, we're talking about her newest book, The Falcon and the Owl. And obviously I met Matty, not Anne. We're talking about Anne, but I'm talking to Matty. Let's just make sure we all understand that. Or let's just make sure I, the podcast host, understand that. Back to the interview.
In terms of Anne, she's evolving in terms of her ability. How else would you say that she, as the character, as the main character of the series, is evolving through the writing?
Well, one thing that I think is a big change is that early on, Anne was a bit of I won't say a victim of circumstance, but she was a bit passively involved in things. So, she gets involved in the murder investigation in the sense of death because the Philadelphia police detective tracks her down and asks her for her help. It's not something she's really pursuing. With each subsequent book, I think she's become more and more active in choosing the path that she takes, and that's been satisfying. Seeing Anne have more agency, I think would be the right term to use, and then also getting a little more comfortable with her skill, because early on it's not something she's comfortable with. It's something that has led to the end of an important relationship for her. As she says, some people believe her, but too many people either think she's crazy or a liar, and that's not a comfortable position for her to be in. And so I think that by the time of books 3 and 4, she's sort of come to terms with that and said, I really don't care if people think I'm crazy or a liar. I know, and the people who are close to me know that what I can do is true.
Mm-hmm. I feel like as she has more agency and she becomes more comfortable with her abilities and not caring what other people think, that she's also making more connections, which I know she's a fictional character, but I worried about her in the first book. She didn't, she didn't have a lot of connections outside of her brother and brother-in-law, and not a lot going on in terms of the outside world and her. So I think she's branching out more too.
And the other thing that I enjoyed that was sort of a companion piece to that in The Falcon and the Owl was that there's this sort of subtext of Anne is kind of tangling with Gwen Burrage, who is an aerobatic and air racing pilot, the top of her profession, and Anne is at the top of her profession. And they both go into this with very, very different ideas about celebrity and what it means and what a person's responsibility is to their fans. The pilot says, you've got to put a show on for your fans. And Anne says, I'm not a performer, I'm a professional. And so that's a tension that really runs through it, and I think is really indicative of both Anne and Gwen's personalities.
Yeah, I would agree. And there's a whole lot that goes on with their personalities clashing, but we won't, I don't want to give a lot away. I know you probably, you watched a lot of investigations into downed flights. So that's one aspect of research. What other kinds of research did you do for this particular book?
Well, one of the things that I got to do, which was very interesting, is I called up the NTSB, and I got the phone number for the NTSB. I might have been able to get this off the internet, but I used to belong to, and my husband currently belongs to, an organization called AOPA. It's the Airline Pilots and Owners Association, or Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association, and they had given me the number for the NTSB, which is kind of like nerve-wracking to call the NTSB. And I got who must be this call screener for the NTSB, who, let's say, wasn't very friendly. It wasn't rude, but it was all business, And so I explained to him that I had these questions about, I was writing a book and it involved a small plane crash in a mountainous area. And I had some questions about how an investigation like that would be conducted. And so finally I got through to, one of the actual investigators, and he was so nice and so helpful and so excited that, to talk about fiction with someone. And it's always just very instructive when you find those people who know everything about their profession and they love to talk to a fiction author about it. That is just gold. You can't have too many of those kinds of subject matter experts. So that was very interesting. And just I had to another question I got to ask my friends who are mechanically inclined in the aviation industry is, if you wanted to bring down a small plane but have it look like an accident, how would you do that? So, they all had opinions on that. So, it was a combination of tapping into those very, very official sources like the NTSB, and then some more informal sources. And then it really was just a lot of, you can really find videos about anything. And so I spent a lot of time on YouTube looking for those.
All right. A little morbid, but very cool.
Yeah, I should say on a much more cheerful topic, because Gwen Burrage is an aerobatic pilot and an air racer, I also got to talk to two pilots in that world. One is Matt Chapman. Matt is actually based at New Garden Flying Field, which is the basis for the fictionalized Avondale Airport, and he was super helpful. And then he introduced me to a woman named Vicki Bensing, who is based on the West Coast and who is an air racer. She's flown in the Reno Air Races, which anyone who knows about aviation will have heard of, and flies just a huge variety of jets and propeller planes, and just incredibly talented. And both of those folks were so helpful, and just willing to sit on the phone with me and describe, like, what does it feel like when you do this kind of maneuver, and how close to the ground can you get, and what are the regulations regarding where you can practice and things like that. So that was really fun also.
Yeah, that does sound like a lot of fun. I'm curious about characters. When you write characters, obviously Anne is the main character, so you probably know quite a lot about her. In terms of even some main characters and secondary characters, how much do you know about that character before you start writing? Do you have do you develop that character a lot before you start writing, or does that kind of happen through the progression of the writing? How does that work for you?
It's sort of a combination. I would say that for a lot of my writing, I thought through it pretty thoroughly before I put fingers to keyboard. And so I'm never just sitting and staring at a blank screen. I might be, folding laundry or taking the dog for a walk, but I'm writing in my brain, and the character is developing as I'm doing that. And then when I sit down, I have a sense of the kind of person I'm writing about. But then I do also find that as I'm writing, either the person just becomes more fully fleshed to me, and so I can, make them hopefully more fully fleshed out for the reader as well. Or sometimes I realize that I need to adjust their character a bit for the purposes of the story. So maybe, I think it's usual that I don't make the bad guy very bad on the first draft. And in fact, it was funny because in The Falcon and the Owl, the person who was the whodunit person was totally different. I wrote a whole first draft with it being a totally different person, and then I got to the end, and I had my editor took a look at it, and he said, "Well, I think you have to make this character less sympathetic, so the reader won't be totally shocked when it turns out that this is the person who did it." And I thought, I'm just not feeling that. I worked on that for a while, and I finally just said, I think I just picked the wrong person to be the bad guy. And so I had to rework it so that that person wasn't the bad guy. So yeah, sometimes as you're writing, you realize that either the characters are taking you in a certain direction or the story is taking you in a certain direction. You kind of have to heed those feelings.
Because you write series, so you've got recurring characters throughout each series, do you have, I don't know, dossiers on each character of some sort?
I've started doing this now because this was a funny one. I was working on A Furnace for Your Foe, and I had a really clear mental picture of Garrick Mazur, who started out as a secondary character, but is becoming, quite a central character. This is Anne's sometimes mentor, sometimes competitor who lives in Maine. And I was writing some scene where I referred to his beard, and I had this blank of, I can't remember if I ever said whether Garrick had a beard or not. And plus, even though in many ways in my mind he was very fleshed out, how there are just some people, like there's some guys where they can show up at work and they're a coworker, and it's like in the afternoon before you realize that they've shaved off their beard and mustache. It's just so intrinsic to their face that, and then other people, they make a tiny change and it's very noticeable. And I think Garrick was one of those first ones that, like, not only do I think I've never said, but I think I might have pictured him differently in different books. And so as the series is getting longer, I'm starting to run into those things where, I can go back and look up what color fur Scott Pate's cat had, but I am starting to keep a diary more of like logistical details, like this person is left-handed, or, this person hates beer, or, these little things that I would drop in but might not remember 2 books later. I have started to try to keep kind of a diary of those kinds of things. And in some cases, it becomes kind of a dossier. So, yeah, I think that's getting more important with each passing book.
All right, fun. And I can only imagine how many details you do need to keep track of.
It is funny that not only do I have to keep track of what's in the books, but I remember talking to a group of readers, I think it was at a book club one time, and they asked me some detail about a kind of a minor scene, and I was waffling, and I said, did this happen at the scene, or did that happen? And somebody said, you wrote it and you don't remember? And I said, yeah, but you only read one version and I read 12. And now I have to remember which of those 12
right.
made it into the book. So it's also necessary to guard against those things that you think you remember, but that was actually in draft one, not in the final draft.
Yeah, definitely a good test of your memory and your memory skills.
Yeah. And I don't want to rely on memory for those kinds of things.
Especially not with pandemic brain.
Yeah.
So many details to keep track of. It's amazing, all of the tricks and techniques that people use to keep track of those very many details. We're going to go ahead and take that second break of the podcast. When we come back, more, of course, about Ann Kinnear and the series, the Ann Kinnear Suspense series. So stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I will be right back.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast. I am speaking with author Matty Dalrymple about the third book in her Ann Kinnear suspense novel series. It is The Falcon and the Owl, and let's go ahead and return now to the interview with Matty.
So this is the third, The Falcon and the Owl, and it's been out for a while. You've also got the newer one, the fourth book, A Furnace for Your Foe, which just came out. Is that correct?
That's right. The third book came out in October of 2020, and then book 4, A Furnace for Your Foe, came out in April of this year, 2021.
All right. And what can you tell us about A Furnace for Your Foe, and what is next for Ann?
A Furnace for Your Foe returns to Maine. So the setup is a little bit, it's a tiny bit of spoiler, so I won't go into too much detail, but Anne finds herself in Maine, again with Garrick, and I don't think it's too much of a spoiler to say that the documentary that Corey Duff is pestering her to do in book 3, Corey Duff originally made an appearance in book 1, a very small role, and then comes back in book 3, and he's pestering Anne to do a documentary, which is part of the ongoing argument that she and Gwen Burrage have about Anne not wanting to do a documentary, and Gwen feeling like, hey, if somebody wants to do a documentary about you, why would you say no? But Anne has agreed to do it, so she's in Maine working on the documentary, and Corey wants to do it on having Anne and Garrick try to contact a dead person. So it would be sort of like, I'm trying to think of a real life example, like treasure hunters, except with dead people. I'm sure there are lots of existing shows out there like that. But he wants to do kind of like the classy version of that. But he's been saddled with this kind of a minder assigned to him by the people who are financing the documentary, who's just a thorn in everyone's side. And so they're up in, or Corey's up in Maine looking for a topic. A researcher at a lab that investigates fire suppression and prevention on Mount Desert Island dies, and Corey thinks that this would be a good topic for the documentary. Anne goes up there. Garrick is already there, and then just shortly after they get there, a second researcher at the lab disappears. And so, again, it's Anne and Garrick, but mainly Anne this time. So this is what I like. This time it is mainly Anne who's leading the charge, need to apply their skills to try to find out what is happening to the researchers at this lab.
And of course, it's not going to go smoothly. I can just tell.
Poor Anne.
Poor Anne.
Yeah, things just intrinsically never go smoothly for her.
No, but because again, that would be boring.
I'll just say that one of the things that I enjoy, I also have 5 Anne Kinnear suspense shorts in addition to the novels. And one of the things that's fun about those is that it doesn't always have to go that badly for Anne. Like there are a couple of just funny ones, because I think poor Anne, she just needs something's going wrong, but it's not always life and death,
Right. That actually reminds me. So what, if people wanted to read the books and the short stories, do they need to read the short stories in a certain order along with the novels, or no?
No, I don't think so. I'm trying to keep them quite separate chronologically. Like I'm hoping no one ever tries to slot the short stories into where they must take place among the novels, because in some cases I can imagine I might write a short story and then down the road write a novel that's largely based on the short story, but might make, whatever changes I need in order to make it worthy of a novel-length treatment and not a short story-length treatment. So they are quite separate, but I think that if somebody read one of the, any one of the novels first to sort of get a sense of Anne's background, that would be good, but then the short stories can be read in any order. But I am trying to make them, my goal is to have, so I currently have 5 that are out on the retailers for sale as standalone shorts. I have one that I make available to people who subscribe to my email newsletter, and then I have one that I just finished that I'm going to be submitting to an anthology. So a couple more beyond that. I'm hoping I'll have 12, and then I'm planning on publishing them as an anthology, one for each month of the year, and have the subtitle be A Year of Kinnear. So there would be, one on Valentine's Day, there'd be one on the 4th of July, one appropriate to each month. So in that case, you probably will be reading them in a certain order.
Right. Oh, I like that. And I like the rhyme.
Yeah.
I probably have asked you this before. I'm nosy. Do you have an overall arc for Anne's story, or do you want to just write until you don't feel like you have any more Anne stories? Do you have a plan for that?
Right now, my plan is to write until I don't have any more Anne stories. I do have my other series, which is the Lizzie Ballard Thrillers. That's a trilogy, and that definitely has an arc. And it's the kind of thing that I can imagine picking up again later, because I'm kind of missing Lizzie and her friends. But I would probably start it out later. So in most of the Lizzie Ballard books, Lizzie is, well, in the early part of the first book, she's very young. But for most of it, she's 16 or 17 years old. So I can imagine if I went back to Lizzie, she would be an adult. She'd be 20 or 21 or something like that. And it would be really kind of like a fresh start, except with many of the same characters. And I think certainly she's going to evolve over time, but I'm not working toward and we're going to wrap it up in book 6. But I'm finding that one very interesting thing, I am not a romance writer in any way. And after 3 books, I thought, I kind of feel like I have to give Anne a date. Not even a boyfriend, just a date.
Uh-huh.
And so I was playing around with that a little bit in book 3. Still don't read book 3 if you're looking for romance. It's not that kind of book. But yeah, it's very interesting because now I'm on to book 4, and it's kind of set up that, yeah, Anne might have a date in book 4, and I'm just thinking, oh no, is this going to be horrible? Because it's just so not what I've been writing about Anne all along.
Right. Well, and Anne is, she doesn't strike me as terribly romantic herself. So.
Right, exactly. And I have had people say that one of the things they like about the series is it's not, it's not Anne, pining after a boyfriend or the guy coming to the rescue. It's, she's pretty much a lone wolf, and she has her brother and her brother's husband as her support structure, and, some other people that are, her close ties. But up till now, I've kind of been able to get away with the fact that she did have a serious boyfriend who, she fell out with as a result of her abilities. And that, she was so burned by that has sort of, maybe she's still on the rebound, but pretty soon she has to stop rebounding. So we'll see how that goes.
Mm-hmm. And I love, personally, I love reading romances, but also it is very refreshing in this series that Anne is not, like there's often the love triangle. There's 2 men interested in the main character, and, they bounce back and forth, and it's this on again, off again thing that you have to read through the whole series. And so it's kind of nice to just have Anne be Anne and do her thing and not have all the complications of relationship in there.
Yeah, I think it is sort of empowering, and it does make it easier to give Anne that agency that I think she's developing over time. That she does rely on the people around her, but in a sort of more holistic way, I think. And yeah, well, I'll have to cross the dating bridge when I come to it.
Well, I will. I'll wait with bated breath to see what you come up with. So what are you working on currently?
Well, I'm working on a couple of things. Unfortunately, I am just finishing up this Anne Kinnear suspense short, which I'm going to be submitting to an anthology. And it's funny because this anthology specifically said that they didn't mind. In fact, they encouraged use of profanity. So there's way more swearing in this short story than any other Anne Kinnear book. Not by Anne, but by the people.
I was going to say, wait, there's not a lot of swearing in Anne Kinnear books. Okay.
No, there's not. There actually was more swearing in book 1. And I started seeing in my reviews people saying, oh, really love this, love the characters. But there was like kind of a theme of, but there's a lot of swearing in it. I was like, oh, there isn't that much swearing in it. And I went and looked, and I counted how many times one particular character dropped the F-bomb, and it was like 17 times. I was like, okay, yeah, that is a lot. And so I actually went through and I toned it down a little bit. So maybe he only drops the F-bomb 9 times now. But that is kind of a benefit of being independently published, that you can make those kinds of adjustments. But I have to say, after the first one, there's very little profanity in the subsequent books until this one short story. And I think when, if it gets accepted by the anthology, then there'll be a period of time when it needs to be exclusive to the anthology. But eventually I would put that out as a standalone. And I think I would put a caveat on there saying, just be forewarned, there's a lot of swearing in this one. Kind of like, I have one that's based on Easter, and I very explicitly say, this is not your traditional Easter story, and it's not what you want to get if you're looking for Christian lit. So I try to be very upfront with, so people know what they're getting. But I am just wrapping that up, which has been fun. And I had started, while I was getting ready for the launch of A Furnace for Your Foe, I had started on Anne Kinnear 5. And I think I have a general idea. Well, I do have a general idea of what the storyline's going to be, but it's very, very sketchy. So I'm actually going to be going up to Mount Desert Island, Maine in a couple of weeks for a vacation with my husband. So I'm hoping to get a lot of work done on that. And then the kind of behind the scenes thing is that I wrote a standalone, non-supernatural, non-paranormal standalone in 2019. Had a brief period where I was exploring a traditional publisher for that, and I finally just decided that just wasn't for me. You know, I started hearing about people, even people who had traditional publishing deals that were sort of ideal. You know, the publisher was great. They were, you know, a vibrant and growing company. They loved their editor. The publishing company was very responsive. I would hear these stories, and it didn't appeal to me that much. And I thought, if this isn't appealing to me, and I'm judging it by the best out there, you know, it's probably not for me. So then I decided I was right on the brink of putting that out, and then I had a number of beta readers, but I had a beta reader who I just discovered kind of late in the game, and she had some really, really good input that I wanted to factor in. So I am trying to wrap that up and then probably move on to Ann Kinnear 5 at that point.
All right, thank you. As you have continued writing and you've gotten more novels, more short stories, more nonfiction under your belt, has your writing process changed at all through your experience?
It's really changed more because I left my corporate job in 2019. And, you know, so I've been doing this full time, dividing my time among the fiction writing, the nonfiction writing. I have 2 nonfiction books out, one about using short fiction for creating income and connecting with readers, and one about podcasting for authors. And the podcast, that takes a lot of time. But I say that the mechanics of how I write haven't changed that much. I actually have a writing sprint with 2 other crime authors from 1 to 2:30 every day except Friday. And it's actually really cool. It's an online Zoom-based writing sprint, and it means that I need to wrap up all my administrative stuff by 1 o'clock to do that, which is really good because I think I could easily get sucked into the administrative marketing side of things and let a whole day go by without getting any fiction writing done if it weren't for that. So that's been really helpful. Yeah, so it's mainly been, you know, all the administrative stuff until 1, and then, you know, 1 to kind of mid-afternoon, focusing on fiction, and then filling in the evenings with whatever I let slip earlier in the day.
Time for that last break of the podcast. When we come back, Matty will give you all the important details about her own podcast. So stay tuned for those. You're listening to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I will be right back. Pets bring such joy to our lives, and the GSMC Pets Podcast is here to share in that joy. We'll tell stories of pets finding their forever homes, acting in unexpected ways, being helpful, or just being silly. Whether you love dogs, cats, llamas, reptiles, fish, or you've never met an animal you didn't like, the GSMC Pets Podcast is for you. GSMC Book Review Podcast. That GSMC Pets Podcast commercial over the break reminded me of Matty's Facebook Readers Group page and how she posts lots of animal-related stuff. She's a big supporter of rescue animals and just animals in general, and she posts some really fun, really cute pictures of animals, and so it's worth it for the book stuff, but it's also worth it for the animal stuff. So if you want to check out her Facebook reader group, you should definitely do that. Let's go ahead and turn now to the conclusion of my interview with author Matty Dalrymple. We are talking about her Anne Kinnear suspense series.
Mm-hmm. Can you talk a little bit more about your podcast? Where can people find it? How often does it come out? All the good details?
Yeah, I would love to. It comes out every Tuesday, and it's called the Indie Author Podcast, and it's Indie with a Y, I-N-D-Y. If you remember that my name is Matty, M-A-T-T-Y. When in doubt, just use a Y. But yeah, we've just coming up on 80 episodes, and every week I have an expert in some aspect of the writing craft and the publishing voyage, and I've been very lucky in many of the guests I've had on. Robert Dugoni on talking about backstory and flashbacks, Stephen James talking about how to maintain suspense in a novel, Hank Philippi Ryan on talking about how she has applied her background as a news reporter to her fiction stories, and then a number of people talking about the business side as well. So I've mentioned Joanna Penn of the Creative Pen, Mark Leslie LaFave of Kobo and Drafted Digital, Michael Laron, Orna Ross, who's is the head of the Alliance of Independent Authors, which is one of the premier champion organizations of independent authors. So yeah, I've been very excited about the caliber of people I've been able to engage in the podcast and the conversations we've had. So that is, you could find that on any podcast platform, and also have a website for that, theindieauthor.com, and Facebook and Twitter feeds.
Awesome. Thank you. In all of it sounds like you're just scads of spare time. What have you been reading lately?
Oh, I have been reading, I should double check to make sure I'm going to get the name right, but Ben Aronovich, I'm not positive I'm saying his name right, Aaronovitch, but my sister introduced me to him. He has this series, it's like a supernatural police procedural. It's a series called Rivers of London, and it's just fantastic. If anybody has ever read, did you ever read any of the, I'm having to look this up too, the Bartimaeus trilogy? That was by, Peter Stroud, I think. Jonathan Stroud. It's a similar kind of very cheeky, just wonderfully realized world. And so I don't even know how many, I think there are like 8 books in the Rivers of London series, and I just started on one, and I've been plowing right through it. So yeah, Ben Aronovich, Rivers of London, I can highly recommend.
All right, thank you.
And it's
I always like to know.
Yeah, I think that anyone who likes Anne Kinnear would really like these books, because one of the things I try to do with the Anne Kinnear books is it's a totally normal world except for this one little switch of Anne being able to communicate with dead people. And I think that the Rivers of London I'm loving the same way, because it's like a London-based police procedural, except there's this sort of kind of underground but not totally magical effect. So, you know, you have the police in London occasionally contacting the protagonist's boss when something that seems a little strange happens. You know, there's a crime that seems like it might have magic involved. But I really just love that when everything's pretty much normal except one little thing has been tweaked, and it just makes you relook at everything in a very different way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You mentioned the website for the podcast, Indie Author. Can you also tell people where they can find your website and your author social media? Your author social media pages.
Sure. They can go to mattydalrymple.com, and as I said, that's Matty with a Y, M-A-T-T-Y, and you can find me at Matty Dalrymple on Facebook and Twitter.
Thank you. Matty, is there anything that we haven't covered in our time together that you wanted to make sure you mentioned in terms of writing or anything else?
I think the only other thing I'll mention is that I just started a private Facebook group. This was actually one of the things that came out of a conversation I had on the Indie Author Podcast. And one of the fun things about the Indie Author Podcast is if I have a question about anything in my author career, I can just invite the expert in that area onto the show. But I was talking with Jason Casper because he had gone from publishing indie to accepting a traditional deal. And so we were talking about that. But in the process of doing that, he had mentioned that he had started a private Facebook group and that, Facebook algorithms now favor private groups over, let's say, an author page. That, it's very hard to get any traction or even visibility with Facebook posts from an author page. So I just started that up. It's called Matty Dalrymple. I can't even say my own name. Matty Dalrymple Readers Group. And if anyone reads either the Ann Kinnear suspense novels or the Lizzie Ballard thrillers and would like to come on over to Facebook, they can not only follow me on my author page, but if you want lots of pictures of my dogs and funny animal videos, then also check out the Matty Dalrymple Readers Group.
All right. Cool. Thank you. That is interesting about the algorithms. They're always changing.
Yes, they are.
Forcing us to keep on our toes.
That's right.
Well, Matty, thank you so much. As always, I enjoy talking to you so much, and I love reading both your Ann Kinnear and your Lizzie Ballard series. So thank you so much for joining me once again.
Oh, thank you. This was so much fun, Sarah. Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you once again to Matty for not only joining me this time, but joining me for the third time. I always enjoy speaking with her, and I really enjoy the books. Also, the books, all of her books are available on audiobook. So if you're a fan of audiobook, you can listen to not only the Ann Kinnear suspense series, but also her Lizzie Ballard series on audiobook. I have listened to several of them on audiobook, and I have enjoyed all of them. So if audiobooks are your thing, you should check out those audiobooks. Also, if you are a fan of mystery, of suspense, of a little bit of paranormalness, that's not a word, but a little bit of paranormal in your novels, then you should definitely check out the Ann Kinnear suspense series, because it is a lot of fun and it has that element of paranormal and that element of suspense, but it's not like creepy, scary paranormal, which is not always my cup of tea, but this is more my speed of paranormal. So definitely check out, if you're a fan of paranormal, mystery, suspense, etc., check out the Ann Kinnear series and check out her Lizzie Ballard series as well. You can hear about that on the other interview with Matty, and she talked a little bit about it here, of course. Again, those other interviews are episodes 41 and 92 if you want to check those out. I hope you will join me again on the next episode. Another returning author. This is his second time on the podcast. I will be speaking with author Greg Hickey about his new book, Parabellum. It is also a mystery, but it's written a little differently. So I'm not gonna tell you too much. I want you to tune in and find out why it's different than some other mysteries might be written. Again, that is author Greg Hickey. It is his new book, Parabellum. If you're a fan of this podcast, I once again would like to encourage you to write a review or give us a starred review, write a review, follow on social media. All of those things help so much to get this podcast out to more listeners. You can follow us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, GSMC Book Review. Please do comment. Tell me what you think about the authors and the books that they write and which ones you've read and which ones you love. I love to hear from listeners. And tell me about that murder weapon question that I asked a while back in the episode. Again, thank you to Matty. Thank you, as always, to you, my listeners. I am so appreciative of all of you. Hope you're having a great week so far, and I hope that the rest of your week involves lots and lots and lots of time to get yourself lost in a good book. Thanks.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast. part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. From movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.